There's a day that I remember in elementary school. It was a really weird day. We were told that the boys were going to go to the playground and all the girls were going to go to the band room to watch a movie. And when we got there, all the girls from the grade were there. We were so excited to watch a movie together, and one of the teachers started the movie projector and the Disney logo splashed on the screen, and we were like, all right, the boys are outside and we're watching Disney. What? I have never seen this movie before. Ew. No, that is not going to happen to me. And the narrator gave us lots of advice in a condescending tone, telling us, you should wear makeup to lift your morale during that time. It's smart to keep looking smart. And he also said, put aside any pain that you might feel and be nice, because no matter how you feel, you have to live with people. You have to live with yourself, too. Once you stop feeling sorry for yourself and take these days in stride, you'll find it easy to keep smiling and even-tempered. Then the school nurse. I didn't know quite how this one was going to go. I was like, well, this is going to get me fired for sure. No preacher has ever preached about this before. But it doesn't matter if you are 40 years older than me or 20 years younger than me. This is an experience that by your laughter, I can tell is universal in the Western world. Half of us go play kickball, and half of us are indoctrinated with shame. And I'm sure that it makes you uncomfortable a little bit, that's why we're laughing, that I'm talking about this, because it is not polite. That nurse told us not to tell the boys what had happened. And here I just did it right in front of church. And I certainly don't want to go into graphic detail, and I certainly don't want to hear too much information.
Thank you.
But this is a taboo subject. And sometimes when we have taboo subjects, that secret keeping makes bad things happen. People don't go to the doctor when they should because they can't talk about the embarrassing thing that's going on down south. Boys and girls, we all have this problem. People ignore their pain because they've been told to ignore the pain and be nice. Just take it in stride. Even though we know that pain is a message from our body sometimes that things need to be tended to. And then when they finally do get to the doctor, sometimes things are really bad. And the doctor says, if only you had come to see me sooner, I could have done something. Sometimes, in order to be made well, we need to stop hiding the thing that we believe is taboo and just be out with it. And that's what we learn from the woman in today's scripture. For 12 years, this woman's very life was draining from her body. Weakness, cramping pains, embarrassment, isolation, humiliation. She was broke. She had spent all of her money on doctors that only made her feel worse. She had a chronic medical problem. She reminds me of people that I know, frustrated, angry, sad, grieving a life lost because of the shackles of their condition, embarrassed about how they appear, humiliated that they said yes to an invitation only to have to miss the party due to terrible pain, having to take a bunch of precautionary measures when all they need to do is go outside, go for a short trip. They've got medication and supplies, and they've got an escape route just in case things don't go well. We all know people like this. People who want to be in the world but are terrified that their bodies might not be able to handle it. And so she spent her days scrubbing and washing, even though she knew that she could never do enough to be clean. Everyone told her that she was unclean. And I imagine that morning began like every morning, heating water to boil her clothes and her linen, scrubbing and scrubbing to remove the shame, but never being able to get clean enough. But then she noticed the crowd passing down the street, following the miracle man that she'd heard about. Jesus, she whispered. Everyone he touches is healed. Even if all I do is touch his clothes, I know that I will be healed. And so she dropped her wet laundry to the ground and she ran to the crowd, jostling her way through the crowd to Jesus. And she reached out her hand to touch his cloak, and at the very moment that her hand touched his clothes, her problem stopped. Energy came back into her body. She could feel that she was whole again. And she was clean. And Jesus stopped. He stopped because even with all of the people who were jostling against him, he felt her touch him in faith and in hope. He felt healing power flow out of him. And he felt her deep weariness. He stopped. He stopped. Even though he and the crowd were rushing to the home of an important person on a life or death mission, he stopped, allowing himself to be sidetracked. He stopped because this woman, too, was reaching for her life. And he asked, "Who just touched my robe?" And then there was silence. And Jesus just stared at the crowd. And his disciples said, "Jesus, the crowd is so thick that lots of people were touching you. Why did you ask, 'Who touched me?'" And Jesus just waited. He swept his eyes across the crowd to see who had done it. And the woman was stunned. "He's talking about me." She was shaking with fear. What power he had. What would I do? What would he do? I am made well. And Jesus waited as she mustered up the guts to push herself through the crowd, and she dropped to her knees, and she said, "I touched you. I did it." And then she told him why she had touched him. She told him how for 12 years her very life had been draining from her body. Weakness and cramping pains, embarrassment, isolation, humiliation. She was broke. She had spent all this money on these doctors who just made her feel worse. And every day she spent scrubbing and washing, even though she knew that she could never do enough. Everyone told her that she was unclean. And Jesus listened. Jesus listened. He didn't scrunch up his face in disgust. He didn't say, "You know what? TMI." He didn't flinch as she was talking in great detail about a taboo subject. He treated her with incredible honor, dignity. And he says, "Daughter, you are well because you dared to believe. Go in peace and stay well." And you remember that I mentioned that Jesus was on the way to this important guy Jairus' house. He was a leader in the synagogue to heal his daughter who was dying. Well, just at this very point, Jairus' servants show up shouting, "Hey, your daughter has died." Now, it used to bother me when I realized that out of these two stories, the only person who has a name is Jairus. The woman, no name. But then I found out that Jairus' name is a clue. In Greek, Jairus means he who is about to be awakened. Jairus' daughter was 12 years old. Again, 12 years. She had lived as long as the other woman had been sick. And Jairus loved her. She got sick one day, and sicker and sicker. He called doctors and prayed and bought medicine and hired nurses, and he cared for her. And this morning, as he gave her some cool, clean water, he and his wife had a moment. She gave him that look. Maybe she even said, "Jairus, you've got to do something. Do anything. Go find that miracle worker that everybody's talking about. I don't care what other people think about your job. Do not let this happen to her, to me, to you. Do something." And so this dignified synagogue leader, one of the religious authorities, goes and finds Jesus just as he gets off of the boat. And Jesus is already in trouble with the religious authorities, of whom Jairus is one. By desperately begging Jesus to heal his daughter, Jairus has risked humiliation and censure. And he also knows that while he's on this desperate fool's errand, he might not be able to tell her goodbye. And then, even worse, Jesus has the gall to stop to deal with some unclean woman. "Hurry up, Jesus." "Too late," the servants say. "Your daughter is dead. There's no reason to drag the master any further." Jesus overhears their words, and he turns to Jairus, and he says, "It's all right. Don't be afraid. Just believe." Maybe like me, you remember having something horrible happen, something terrible, and somebody says to you, "Don't worry, everything's going to be all right." Or, "You're okay." But you're not okay, and everything's not going to be all right. Things and people and relationship are in pieces. It's never going to be okay, and it's never going to be all right. But Jesus says it. Jesus can say it. It's all right. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Don't listen to them. Trust me. And they arrive at the house, and as they make their way through the gossips looking for a story, and the neighbors bringing casseroles, and the hired mourners that are weeping and wailing, which was the rational thing to do at the moment, because there was nothing in these people that could fathom that this death was anything other than unspeakably tragic and horrible. James and Peter, Jesus and John went into the house. And Jesus asked the mourners, "Why are you making all this sorrowful noise? The child isn't dead. She's just sleeping." And maybe you've seen the reaction of somebody who's been told everything's okay, when things are obviously not okay and will never be okay again. Something like that is a kick in the gut. It's traumatic. And Scripture tells us that the mourners laughed a horrible, bitter laugh and began wailing again. Jesus cleared the room, and in that quiet place, Jesus, Peter, James, and John gathered with Jairus and his wife. I try to think of it from his wife's point of view. I imagine it was incredibly awkward. Maybe he tried to embrace her, and she pulled away from his touch, stifling the sobs that were silently racking her body. I imagine that she looked at him with pain in her eyes, and maybe some blame too. Maybe she cried out, "If only you had brought him here 10 minutes sooner. What took you so long?" Jesus approached the bed and took the hand of the little girl, and he said, "Little girl, it's time to wake up." And she did. And of course, everyone was amazed and shocked and overjoyed. And Jesus told the parents, "Don't tell anyone what you've seen. Why don't you give her something to eat? I'm sure she's hungry." Why does Mark tell us these stories? Why does one story interrupt the other? We know that these stories are in here in this gospel to explain the nature of God to us. Our God is a God who listens to interruptions. And Jesus knew that Jairus wasn't begging him out of faith, but out of desperation. You know, the old saying, "There's no atheists in foxholes." I think that's where Jairus was. I don't think he quite believed that Jesus was the direction he should be headed in. But even when we approach God like that, God still stops for us. Our God is a God who bends to make grace possible, stopping in the road. Our God is one who honors what we do not honor, the unclean and the sinner. Our God is one who listens to our whole story, even or maybe especially when there is too much information. Our God can say, "It's going to be okay," because God helps us to be made whole. Our God is one who can make a way when there is no way. Our God feels compassion about big things and little things. Our God seeks us out from the crowd when we reach out in faith to claim life. I hope that makes you glad. Aren't you glad? Aren't you glad to know that the God whose mighty voice calms the winds and the waves is the same God who reminds parents to give his children a snack? Aren't you glad that the God who is more powerful than anything that you can imagine will stop for you?